I did something different. A lot of times, just the way I do my Sunday evening sermons, the PowerPoint many times is kind of my notes or outline, if you want to call it that. I did that differently tonight, and in fact, I was telling somebody that I had decided I don't think I'm going to have time when I kind of got everything arranged like I wanted it. I said, I don't know if I'm going to have time to do a PowerPoint. And about 5:20, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to try to throw one together because I feel like that's helpful if you got something visual in front of you. But it does sometimes get stressful. A lot of times I decide I'm not going to have a PowerPoint, and then I change my mind and scramble to get that. But I did go ahead and put one together. And the first slide won't make as much sense. It's not a Q&A session per se, but the reason for tonight's study is because a question was asked. I thought I knew who this question came from, and I asked the person I thought it was from, and they said, no, not my question. So I didn't necessarily need clarification. I just sometimes like to know, and just so I can, a lot of times if nothing else, but to go to the person after the fact and say, did that answer the question satisfactorily? But the question is the difference, what is the difference in the birthright and the blessing? Thinking in terms of Jacob and Esau. I thought about that and I thought, So I started doing some more research, and then I got to studying some more, and it's a very interesting question. And I'll go ahead and tell you at the outset, I don't know that I can answer it with 100% certainty. Commentators sort of differ on this, what exactly the difference is. Some people hold that there's not really any difference at all. But in the course of this, and the course of studying this, I ran across just a lot of interesting things about the life of Esau and the character of Esau and Jacob as well. And I just, particularly, and I'll go ahead and tell you, a lot of this comes from a lesson from the, I just went blank on the year. I think it's 2000. I want to say it's 2001. Memphis School of Preaching lectureship. The theme, whatever year it is, the theme that year was the book of Genesis. And so there are a few character studies within that lectureship book, and within that lectureship, of course, everybody writes a manuscript to go with it. And Steve Ferguson had one, and a lot of what I have is sort of paraphrasing, or at least based off what he said, because he had a tremendous submission in there dealing with the character of Esau. And of course, we've looked at some of these characters, lost in the credits we call them, but Esau's not necessarily one we would say is lost in the credits, but he is a character. And so I thought, well, this is kind of the Sunday. A lot of times I'll do a character study. So tonight I want to look at Esau. There's a lot of really, really interesting things here. Reputation. Reputations may be had or earned sometimes in a single act, a single accomplishment, success, or a single failure. Was it, some of you folks may have to remind me, I'm going blank on this. It's the danger of thinking on the fly sometimes. But in the movie Finding Nemo, the fish, Nemo, he earns a nickname. What is it, shark bait? Is that what they called him? Some of you young folks maybe can help me with that. I see a lot of older folks shaking their head too, so I guess we all like that movie, right? Shark bait, and it earns that nickname in that one instance, and it sort of stuck. That happens sometimes, I've known people throughout the years, maybe they had a funny nickname, maybe it was something serious, maybe it's something degrading, but sometimes it comes as a result of one thing happening. And that's sort of what we see with Esau. Hold your spot in Genesis, because there's a divine commentary on the character of Esau over in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 12. And I'll reference this again later on, but let's just go to it now and take a look and read that and see sort of the inspired reputation that is given to Esau. Notice what he says. Now, really, we could back up to about, well, there's a lot bigger context we could back up to, but let's just look at verse 14. Follow peace with all, or with all men, and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator, or, this is where you have the inspired moniker for Esau, or profane person, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. He's called profane person. You may or may not recall, and I know some of you were not necessarily here at that time, but I don't think it was very long at all after coming to Bremen that I preached, I think it was a two-part series. We called it Epitaphs. Now, there used to be the commercial for Tombstone Pizza. What do you want on your tombstone? And so it was sort of a play on words, but we talked about that. What would you want to have on your tombstone? And we looked through several in different places of the Bible. Some were in Hebrews 11, some were in other places. What God, by inspiration, put as an epitaph for several different people. Well, here in Hebrews 12, 16, and 17, you have an inspired epitaph for Esau. Profane person. Now, I'm going to probably mention this again later on, but understand, profane does not, we sometimes view profane as, you know, if you say someone is being profane or using profane speech, you're using very ugly speech. But the word profane itself simply means common. It is distinguished from the word holy. Holy means set apart. And I told you a good everyday illustration was, you know, growing up, we had, like a lot of folks had, and maybe even some still do, Mom had this special set of plates, and they were like, I guess, really expensive, or maybe they were cherished because they'd been passed down through the family. I don't really remember. But we didn't just eat out of those every day. They were not profane. They were not common. They were very much holy. Not in the sense that she revered them as something spiritually significant, but they were set apart. They were sanctified. And if you were to profane those by, you're sitting at home on a Saturday watching your Saturday morning cartoons, and you grab one of those bowls and make you some Golden Grams or whatever your favorite cereal is, you got a problem, because now you've profaned the sanctified plates. And, you know, we understand that, those everyday illustrations, but that's the idea. Profane is set completely opposite from holy. So that's the inspired epitaph for Esau. Here's a man who, instead of setting things apart as he should, certain things, particularly the birthright, he counted it just a common thing. And now going back to Genesis, let's kind of see how that came about. A lot of this is familiar to us. Some of it I will summarize. I won't read every single verse because there are quite a few verses if we read every single one. A lot of this, many of us have studied since we were just cookie crunchers and cracker snatchers, as my father-in-law would say. So again, we'll summarize some of this, but some of this we definitely want to read because Scripture remembers Esau as a worldly man. He was void of real, true conviction, at least in this matter. It doesn't summarize his entire life, by the way. Things do change with him. In fact, in some ways, he sort of, you know, he kind of shows up Jacob a little bit, because even though they're estranged for a while, in Genesis 32, when they meet up again, you may recall it's been several years ago, but we've actually studied from Genesis 32. We called it a happy family reunion. And they meet up, and Jacob's sending gifts in droves. And he sends a few, take a gift with you. He sends a few more, take a gift with you. And oh, by the way, if at any point things get ugly, everybody scatter. And you know, hopefully that way at least most of us can get away. He's scared to death that his brother's going to take revenge. And with good reason. But Esau kind of comes up, well, what is all this? Why are you sending all this? And, you know, he kind of, sort of, you can almost picture Jacob, we might say sheepishly, saying, well, I was just sort of hoping to kind of appease your anger a little bit. And Esau essentially says, oh, forget about that. That's done. And they hug, and everything's forgiven. But in this matter with the birthright, he was void of any real conviction. He was worldly. He was treating it as common. And it ended up being sort of a nickname, a reputation that sticks with him even into the discussion of his life in the New Testament. We're going to break this down into 4 divisions. This is how Brother Ferguson broke it down in his lecture, his manuscript there in the book. And I really like how he breaks it down. He's got it as the distinguished birth of these 2 brothers, then the difficult brotherhood that they had, the despised birthright, and then the desired blessing. Those last 2 points are where we won't spend the time to answer the question that was asked. What is the difference in the birthright and the blessing? So you have the distinguished birth, verses 20 through 28 of Genesis chapter 25. There's this unique situation. Just drop down to verse, did I say 20? Oh, chapter 25. I was thinking verse 25, so that's not right. Verse 20, Isaac's 40 years old. He took Rebekah to be his wife. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Isaac may very well have been in a very real way, very much like his father, being promised, in your seed, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. But also he might have been like his father, as you recall, who was Abraham, who's going, you keep telling me that, Lord, and I believe you, but I hate to point out the obvious, but I don't have a son. And maybe that's kind of how Isaac was feeling. Maybe he learned even from Abraham. Abraham was like anybody. He's a hero of faith, yes, but he's a human. And there were times when his faith was growing and needed to grow a little bit more, and they kind of try to help God out, right? And Sarah says, take Hagar. We know how that worked out, right? Didn't work out so great. But it does seem like maybe Isaac had at least learned something from that. Perhaps, I don't want to read too much in the text without the Bible telling us, but perhaps he did. And so instead of trying to run ahead of the Lord, he entreats the Lord. Verse 21, he asks God for help. And so, because Rebekah was barren, and so the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah conceived. She finds out that she has this unusual amount of activity in utero with these children. She doesn't realize at that time that she's carrying children, as in plural. So she goes to inquire of God. The Lord tells her, 2 nations, verse 23, are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she's told there are 2 children who are 2 nations within her womb. No doubt she likely did not fully understand this. Of course, we have the blessing of hindsight and looking back at this as we see the big picture unfolded, even the big picture of the coming Messiah. And she was, of course, told that the elder would serve the younger. Now, that's going to seem very much out of place to anybody in that culture. The elder doesn't serve the younger serves the elder. But she sort of, as many people did in the Bible, they didn't always understand, but she took it on faith, okay. Which brings us to the question, how could the older serve the younger? Again, the birthright and the blessing traditionally belong to the firstborn. We need to remember that, number one, answering this question, this was more about nations than about individuals. You're going to get to passages like Malachi 1, 2 through 4, and in that passage it's going to say, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. And some people read that and they go, oh, man, how does God say he hated Esau? That seems so cold. That seems so, I don't understand. But as we point out before, hate doesn't always mean hate as we use that word. Sometimes it just simply means you love less. In fact, you'll see this with Rachel and Leah. Later on with Jacob, he has these 2 wives, and Leah is going to see that she's hated by Jacob. But Jacob didn't hate her in the way that we use that word, but what it means is he loved her less. His greatest affection was for Rachel. Jesus even is going to tell us If any man come to me and hate not his father, his mother, wife, sisters, brothers, on and on. Well, he's not telling us we got to despise those people, but we love them less than him. Romans 9:10 through 13, he quotes from that, and I'm kind of mentioning these in passing. There's a lot more to be said there, especially in the context of election and how people get way off course in this Calvinistic idea of predestination. But what he's talking about here, nations, not individuals. Even when Paul discusses this in Romans 9, people take this day and they try to put some kind of, the premillennialists want to have God predestinating Israelites just simply because they're Israelites to being saved, in some kind of millennium that they have envisioned. Then you have the Calvinist who wants to have certain people being chosen before time began to be saved, certain people being chosen before time began to be lost, just arbitrarily. This is about nations. And kind of going with that is the second answer to that question. Someone had to be chosen. There are two sons here. There are two children, two nations. Again, it's more about nations. But the Messiah is only coming through one nation. The Messiah can't come through the Edomites and the Israelites. You understand? It's going to come through one nation or the other. Somebody's got to be chosen. Oh, poor old Edom. That just means God doesn't love them, does it? It doesn't mean that at all. It just means somebody had to be chosen. Sometimes God chose somebody for one thing, somebody else for another. Did he love one more than the other? No. But there were sometimes various reasons for the choices being made. But somebody had to be chosen. So keep that in mind. Although they were twins, Jacob and Esau, you probably don't need me to tell you this, were quite different. You've got, look at verse 25. First came out red, all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau, which means, Esau meaning more like hairy, but later on when this happens with the pottage or the soup or the stew, we might say, verse 30, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red stew, red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom, some kind of a reddish type of stew. But then you look at verse 27, the boys grew, Esau was a cunning hunter. So he's a man of the field. So we could say that Esau is this, hairy man, reddish in appearance, and hence the name Edom, Esau meaning hairy. He's more of a hunter. Jacob his name means supplanter. It literally could be translated, or at least I'm told by some of the Hebrew authorities that it could literally be called heel catcher. And that's what we're told when they were born, you recall. Where is it? Verse 20. I'm just looking right past it. I know I am. 26. After that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. And his name was called Jacob, heel catcher, literally, or supplanter. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. Of course, we noticed about Esau, Jacob's a plain man, dwelling in tents. We might say more of a homebody. He cooks more. And so you've got a difference in these brothers. And then even dropping down to verse 29, Jacob sawed pottage. He was more what we might say more of a cook. So you see the difference in the brothers. They were twins, but they were quite different. And most parents will tell you that sometimes children can be, brothers and sisters. Sometimes it's brothers, sometimes sisters, sometimes a brother and a sister. They can be so different that sometimes you go, how did these two children come from the same parents? And I've talked to numerous parents of twins even that say, oh, they may look alike, they may look identical, but in many ways they're very different. And that happens, and sometimes that's for various reasons. But the same thing here. These were twins, not identical twins as far as their appearance, but very different in their character. And of course, from verse 28, Isaac favored Esau, Rebekah favored Jacob, which is also going to cause later problem, of course. So that brings us to the difficult brotherhood. Genesis 25, 29 through 31. The boys' characters, how their character developed within each of them, no doubt was affected by the preferential, prejudicial treatment by their parents. Nothing good ever comes from partiality, whether that's with our children, whether that's at work, whether that's in the church. And God is no respecter of persons, and we need to be aware of that. It's easy sometimes as parents, maybe a child is born and they have more in common with mom or dad. And so it's easy to kind of start showing that partiality if you're not careful. We've got to watch out for that because nothing good ever comes from that. And so verse 29, you've got 29 through 31 here, this difficult brotherhood. But here's the thing, we're not told anything about their childhood. We have no details given about their childhood. Apparently, when it begins here in verse 29 with Jacob, he's cooking sod is the word that's used in the King James. Boiled is a footnote that I have in my Bible. He's making this stew. This seems to be there at least what we would call young adults at the very least. But there is evidence of discord that's there. Because when you read verses 29 through 31, do you not notice that Jacob is all too eager to take advantage of this situation? He doesn't say, now calm down, brother. You can't be that hungry. You can almost see him maybe like kind of wafting the smell of that soup over there. It does smell good, doesn't it? How hungry are you? He seems a little too eager to take advantage of this situation, does he not? And then, of course, later on, he's going to act with his mother's help to deceive his father. He's not totally innocent here, and we'll point that out later as well. The Bible does focus on Esau's conduct, but it's not saying, hey, Jacob, good job. It's obvious Jacob acts in a very unethical way at least a couple of different times throughout this account. But can there be any doubt that their competition that was between them, that friction that was between Jacob and Esau, had to be at least in part driven by their parents' favoritism? And of course, old Jacob, I guess things that we learn from our parents or we see in our parents sometimes die hard within us. He's going to show that same favoritism when he has a son named Joseph. And how does that work out for them? You would think he would have learned from that, but again, sometimes there are certain lessons that take us a while to learn, don't they? And old habits can die hard. But there was a difficult brotherhood there. Then this, again, gets us more to dealing with the question that was asked. You have the despised birthright. So this is verses 29 through 34 here of chapter 25. Jacob's cooking this stew, this pottage. Esau comes in from the field, and he was faint. Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, red stew, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom, Edom meaning red, like the stew. And Jacob says, you can almost hear him, sell me your birthright. Do what? He said, you're hungry. You said you're about to just fall out. You're so hungry. Sell me your birthright. It's almost ready here. I cook you. I get dip you out a nice steaming hot bowl. It's hearty. Sell me your birthright. My birthright? What's the big deal? You said you're about to starve to death here. And here you see why the Bible calls him, Esau, a profane person, that common. He's not thinking in terms of, you're out of your mind, buddy. The birthright? What is the birthright? Well, it included the rights, the privileges, the honors that were bestowed upon the firstborn son. Well, what rights, privileges, and honors, Chad? I'm glad you asked. It would be you would be especially dedicated to God, the firstborn son was. I'll read a couple of these quickly just for time's sake. But Exodus 22:29 from the New King James Version, he says, you shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Now, God never expected or desired or allowed for human sacrifice, but they dedicated them to God. So the firstborn was especially dedicated to God. Is that a big deal? It would be kind of profane just to brush that aside for a bowl of soup, right? Well, part of the blessing of the birthright was that you would be next in honor to your father. Genesis 49:2-3. Jacob is speaking there. He's near death, and he says, gather yourselves together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. But if you know a little bit about Israelite history, you know the genealogy is not reckoned according to the birthright. Why? That's the reference to 1 Chronicles 5. Listen to what the text says there. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. Read about that over in the book of Genesis, where he went into his father's concubine. He committed an act of sexual immorality with his father's concubine. And so because of that act of disobedience and immorality, he did not receive the blessing of the birthright. It was given to Joseph's children. Of course, Joseph was Jacob's favorite. But these are part of the blessings, the rights, privileges, honors that go with being with that birthright. Next, we could say that the one receiving the birthright, the one who had the birthright, received a double portion of the inheritance. Deuteronomy 21:17. He shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn, talking about if a man had another wife, such as Jacob with Leah, that he didn't care for as much. But if she has the firstborn son, and Leah did, didn't she? He says, you give him a double portion of all that he hath, even though it might not be from your favorite wife there. He says her son gets the double portion. That's the blessing that goes with the birthright. He would also succeed his father in authority. Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 21:3, he gives great gifts to all his sons, but the text says there that it says the kingdom gave he to Jehoram because he was the firstborn. He gives gifts to all his sons, but he gives the kingdom to Jehoram, his son. Why? Well, the text says, because he was the firstborn. It was part of the birthright. Numbers 8:15 through 18. What's going to happen later on is the birthright, it goes to the Levites in the sense of spiritual leadership. Now, before the law of Moses, that when you talk about authority, succeeding his father in authority, that would also be in leading the family, the clan, we might say, in their worship, connection with God, so to speak, because that was under the patriarchal system. Well, who's the patriarch? Well, when Isaac dies, it would be the one with the birthright. It would go to him. And until Abraham died, it was Abraham's. Then it went to Isaac. And when Isaac dies, it'll go to the one who has the birthright. So that changes, though, in Numbers 8:15 through 18, because now the law of Moses comes in and the Levites take on that role. And it actually talks about there in that passage, verse 18 says, God speaking, and I've taken the Levites for all the firstborn of the children of Israel. But those are the blessings that come with the birthright. Those are the rights, the privileges, the honors bestowed upon the firstborn son. But here comes Esau. He's starving to death. Have you ever come in? Maybe you came in from work. Maybe you came in from working outside. It's a hot day. You've been really getting at it. And you say, I'm starving to death. Maybe we say something like, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. And so again, you can just hear Jacob saying, well, give me your birthright. So verse 32, Esau says, you can almost see Esau talking himself into this. And it's no wonder the Bible talks about him as being profane, common, not hallowing this birthright. And so he starts, reasoning with himself. Behold, I'm at the point to die. And what profit shall this birthright do to me? I mean, what good is the birthright if you're dead? And Jacob said, swear. Swear to me this day. Footnote in my Bible says solemnly promise. Sometimes we get the idea that you can never swear. And sometimes when we were growing up as kids, somebody'd say, I swear. I swear. And somebody'd say, don't say that. We get that from Jesus' statement, don't swear by heaven or by earth. But what he's saying there is, don't be a person that you can't be trusted to the point that, well, if Chad says he'll do it, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But if he swears on a stack of Bibles, well, then I think you can count on it. Be a person of your word. That's the point in the New Testament. But even God himself swore by his own name. He could swear by no greater, the Hebrews writer tells us. But it's being very careful in how we use that. And so Jacob says, you give me a solemn oath, a solemn promise. Swear to me. But you're not going to walk out of this room with your bowl of soup and go bebopping out and just, well, sorry, fingers crossed. No, it's not going to work that way. And he sware unto him, verse 33 says, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils. Wasn't that nice of Jacob? No extra charge. He threw in some bread. Like I said, he's not innocent here. He did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Listen to it. Listen to the inspired text. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He despised his birthright. Listen, there's some drama here, okay? This is exaggeration. He says, I'm starving to death. I saw one commentator, I really don't understand why, but he basically was trying to make the argument that, and you have to argue this with inspiration, looking at Hebrews chapter 12 and the last statement of this chapter, but it was almost like in his comments, he's trying to say, everybody back off Esau. The poor guy was starving to death. What was he supposed to do? Jacob had him over a barrel. Well, look, Jacob's not innocent, and I'm not saying he is. Just because the Bible doesn't focus in on Jacob's conduct doesn't mean it was okay. But Esau's being, to say the least, he's being a little dramatic here. One single bowl of soup, if you're at the point of death from starvation, is not going to just, boom, man, back to normal. He's exaggerating. Hebrews 12:16, we read that earlier, that tells us his problem. His problem is he's not looking beyond the tip of his nose. He is short-sighted spiritually. Can you imagine if he sits down and goes, oh, I'm so hungry, sell you my birthright? Let me think about that. And then he's maybe, in his mind, he's looking at this list and he goes, wait a minute, especially dedicated to God? I'm next in honor to my father. There's a double portion of the inheritance to come to me as the firstborn, and it's incumbent upon me to lead my family in authority and also in spiritual matters. No, Jacob. I don't know what's wrong with you and why you would be so awful as to try to sit here and extort me out of my birthright like that. Are you serious? But no, this is too important. Birthright, bowl of soup. Come on, man. But he doesn't do that, does he? Why? Because he's spiritually short-sighted. Aren't you glad nobody has spiritual short-sightedness today? It happens all the time. People, salvation, family, they just give it away. And for what? Sometimes less than a bowl of soup. Sometimes less time than it would take to eat a bowl of soup. As we pointed out, profane means common. The Bible never tells us Esau was a wicked person. Boy, man, he was a terrible person. No, never says that. And again, in his later years, seems he really, really matured and became a faithful servant of God. I just wonder, when I read this passage here in Genesis 25, do you think maybe, I don't think there's any question he's caught up in the moment in his own drama of I'm starving to death. But do you think maybe that even he's thinking to himself, this doesn't really count, even though he had just sworn to it? Do you think maybe he thinks later on he's going to get a mulligan, a do-over? Daddy doesn't know. I'm not going to go tell him. He ain't going to give the birthright to Jacob. He knows I'm the eldest. I'm going to get the birthright. Sure, Jacob, have at it. You can have it. And he may have even walked away smiling. He thinks I just gave him the birthright. I don't know. Maybe he thought that as time went on, that, maybe later on, who knows, maybe even as a few years might pass and Maybe Jacob says something about it, and he says, oh, you still on that? Yeah, sure, buddy. You've got the birthright. Keep telling yourself that. Let's see what Dad does when the time comes. I don't know. But I know he's not seeing the big picture. He's not seeing very far beyond the here and now. And again, I've already pointed out Jacob's actions are unethical here, even though that's not the focus of the text here. Skip over to Genesis 27. And let's see the final point here. We've seen the despised birthright. This is the desired blessing. This is where we do a lot of summary, because obviously we're not going to take time to read 40 verses here, but this is all covered. This is the more familiar to us since we were children, where Jacob comes in. Isaac says too, he's old. He would be estimated by some commentators to be some 137 years old. Jacob and Esau, if that's the case, would be somewhere around 77 years old each. But Isaac sends Esau out. Go get some venison, bring it here. I want to give you the blessing. I wonder even then if Esau's thinking, oh boy, you thought you tricked me out of it, didn't you? Told you I was going to get it. I don't know. But that's what he does. That's what Isaac does. He sends him out. He's going to give him the blessing. Of course, his eyesight isn't great. So Rebekah comes to Jacob and says, I got a plan. And she's not innocent either. They're going to deceive his father. And in fact, at one point in the chapter, Isaac literally asks and says, who are you? It's verse 32. And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. I don't care. And again, sometimes some commentators, go through hermeneutical hoops trying to get around this, but I don't care how you splice it. There's no getting around. That is a bold-faced lie. And so Jacob's not innocent here. But here's the question that sometimes we want to know. Why does Isaac call Esau to receive the blessing instead of Jacob? Well, I think there are a couple of things we could say. It may very well be he didn't know about the kitchen transaction that happened sometime previous. He may not have had any idea about that. Again, that might have been what's in Esau's mind. He might be thinking, well, I'm not telling Dad about this, and he's just going to carry on, and he's going to give me the blessing. I don't know. It might be that Jacob told him later on. Again, Esau's his favorite. He may not really have listened to that, but he may not have known. He may not have known about, some people say, well, what about in Genesis 25:23 when it says the elder shall serve the younger? Well, that was said to Rebekah, so I don't know if he knew about that. If he did, he could have forgotten. I think probably the most logical explanation is he probably just didn't know. Or his favoritism toward Esau might be showing here. I don't know. But again, I think probably most likely he just didn't know about 25:23, that statement that was made. As far as the significance of the blessing, is it different from the birthright? What is the difference, if any? I don't know. I think, again, commentators are a little bit different on this, and they vary in their response. In my studies, I think if there's any difference, it's very slight. There does seem to be some significance in, Genesis 12:1-3, the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. I will make of thee a great nation. And of course, he makes 3 promises to Abraham there. Of course, he's Abram at that time. A land promise. I'm going to give this land to your descendants. There's going to be a great nation come from you. But he says, I will bless him that bless thee, curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And that's the messianic promise. You come to Genesis 22:18. He had been told to offer Isaac. He was about to do it. He raised the knife. He draws back the knife. The angel cries out, stop. He finds the ram over in the bushes. And on the heels of that, God says to Abraham, Genesis 22:18, in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. You come over to Genesis 26:3-4. God is speaking there to Isaac. And he says, in fact, it's just backwards a page in my Bible. Genesis 26 in verse 3. Sojourn in this land, I will be with thee, will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Genesis 27, when Isaac starts to pronounce this blessing upon Jacob, thinking he's Esau, look at verse 29. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren and thy mother's sons, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. It may be that it's, and it does seem to me that it's sort of, as I put it, making it official as far as the birthright. Obviously, if you're the eldest, you have the birthright. But there comes a time, usually as Dad's getting older, Isaac seems to think at this point that his time on earth is very short. Now, as it turns out, he lives several years longer than this. But he may have been thinking because of Ishmael's death at 137 years of age. Maybe he's thinking, well, boys, my time's got to be drawing near. I don't know, but he does seem to think he's close to death. So maybe he wants to make it official, give the blessing. But it also might be that it's connected to that Abrahamic blessing. So in Hebrews 11, verse 20, it says, by faith Abraham blessed, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. He doesn't know that's what he's doing. And then, of course, you have Jacob's deception, verses 6 through 25, Isaac's realization, verses 30 through 33. Isaac realizes what has happened here, and he's as upset as anybody. Now, remember, his favorite was Esau. There's a footnote, and I don't think I have it in this Bible, but it's in my Bible software, where it says in verse 30 that Isaac, not 30, verse 33, Isaac trembled very exceedingly. The footnote in my Bible software says he trembled with a great trembling greatly. I mean, that's in a bad way right there. I mean, he's shaking. He realizes what has happened. Maybe that prophecy came rushing back to him if he had heard it before. The elder shall serve the younger. Maybe it's just, I can't believe what has just happened here. I should have known it. I suspected. I let myself be deceived. I don't know. Esau comes along and he realizes it's too late. He hears the words of his father. Jacob had barely walked out, by the way, when Esau comes back. He might just have barely escaped with his life. Because, as if you've read this text before, you know Esau is not a happy fella at this point. He cries with a great and exceeding bitter cry, verse 34. And says to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. Oh, now it's important to you, Esau? You despised it before. Now it's important? Yes, now it's important. Why? Because now I'm closer to receiving the payoff. And that's the short-sightedness. And he said, thy brother came with subtlety and hath taken away thy blessing. And Esau's furious. Is he not rightly named Jacob? He has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. It does seem from that there is some distinction here between them, be it ever so slight. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Speaking to his father. Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him thy Lord. You picture Esau, those words sinking in. I just made him your Lord, Esau. I bet he had the old proverbial steam coming out his ears. Behold, I've made him thy Lord. All his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? He says it again. Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and the dew of heaven from above. In other words, it's not all bad news for you, but the blessing has been given. And in fact, he makes a statement. It's verse 33, where he trembled exceedingly and said, who? When he says, I'm Esau. He says, where is he that has taken venison and brought it me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. And listen to what he says. This is speaking prophetically. He says, yea, and he shall be blessed. In other words, Isaac realizes, I can't just undo this. He realizes it too late. Esau realizes, too late to change. And so I submit to you, chapter 25 was the most expensive bowl of soup Esau ever had in his entire life. And don't you know, he regretted it for the rest of his life. Going back to Hebrews 12, 16 and 17, it gives us kind of the great takeaway here from this whole account. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost. That's kind of how we would put it in the South, sort of paraphrasing with a colloquialism. The chickens eventually come home to roost. And sometimes it's too late to undo a mistake that's been made earlier. It's not to say that I can't still go to heaven myself, but sometimes we sell something for that proverbial bowl of soup. I may sell family time, training children for more time on the job, more time with this, more time with that. Might even rationalize it in my own mind, saying something like, well, what good is it to spend a bunch of time with family and I'm not making a living? Got to be able to provide nice things for them. And maybe even later on in life realize that was not the best decision, but sometimes it's too late then, right? You can't go back and redo the younger years and train them. And sometimes that happens. Esau did what he could later on in years, but it kind of brings me to the culminating question of the whole sermon is, how are we sowing? What are we doing? Are we selling out for a bowl of soup? It's the most expensive bowl of soup he ever bought in his life. How are we sowing? God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Galatians 6, 7, and 8. If we sow to the flesh, we'll of the flesh reap corruption. If we sow to the Spirit, we'll of the Spirit reap life everlasting. How are we sowing? Esau, again, he seemed to have learned and done better later on in life, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful that happens even to this day. But there was no going back to get that blessing. There was no going back to get that birthright. And so these things are written for our learning. Romans 15:4. How are you and I sowing? Are we sowing to the Spirit, or are we sowing of the flesh, or to the flesh? The good news tonight is, if you're sowing to the flesh, you're going to reap a harvest, but make the changes now. God says you can make changes. As long as you're alive and got opportunity, you can make the changes. You can come to Christ. You can obey the gospel. You could be restored if you've wandered away. Maybe you just need strengthening. You can be strengthened. But how are we sowing? Because we don't make those changes, we will eventually reap what we've sown. Can we help you in any way? And making sure that you're sowing to the Spirit so that you may of the Spirit reap life everlasting. If so, come as we stand and sing to encourage you. I have decided.